So I wanted to make a video documenting how I destroyed my health over the course of several years. And I have several points here. I'll talk quickly, and this is just going to be as an overview of what's happened. So starting at the age of like 13 to 17, within that block there, I was eating a lot of processed foods, and I would have like white bread and peanut butter almost every single day. And I would just have like these little processed fruit snacks, and whenever I got hungry, I would have Coca-Cola instead of having actual food. I had like very, very minuscule amounts of vegetables, some starch, but it was really just like a lot of bread, a lot of milk. Had very little sunlight, some physical activity, but yeah, very little sunlight. And I was on the computer all the time. I don't think I like flossed at all. I would maybe floss like once every 2 weeks, if that. Yeah, I was just trashing myself, living on basically Coca-Cola for a long time. It was a big part of my calories. By the time that I was at 18, I had acne, and I realized that if I removed dairy, then the acne would go away and my health improved markedly, so I did that. And that was like the very first encounter that I had with changing my diet and it changing my health in some way. And then I went off to college for a year, and I continued to live on like basically ramen noodles, boxed cereal. I got like very, very little sleep. I was working full-time hours, and I took 15 credit hours. And I would like procrastinate projects, and I would stay up on like online chat rooms, and I just got like no sleep. I was super stressed all the time, and my diet was still garbage. Then, not too long after that, I started smoking weed. Somebody showed me that, and then somebody else showed me a gravity bong, which is like he basically showed me that you could take a plastic 2 liter and go get a pitcher from a dollar store. So for practically nothing, you can make this contraption where you put a very, very small amount of weed, and then you get a very large hit from that. The problem is that I did that like day in and day out for probably 6 to 8 months of my life. It was like before work, in the middle of work, after work, before grocery shopping, before the movies, before exercise, like just constantly always using that. So my threshold to be high was like very high, as it were. Then I moved in with a girlfriend, and I had like slightly more of a balanced diet during that time period, but it still was pretty garbage. From the age of like 18 to 22, I would have energy drinks. I'd probably average like one a week, one every 2 weeks at the most. But at a certain point, they just became super inflammatory, so I just had to cut them out entirely. All right, so now this is whenever it goes really downhill. So I broke up with the girl. We broke up mutually, and I started living on my own. And the people that I was living with, they gave me a pretty good deal on a house. It had like a decent property, only $500 a month. It was cool, but the problem was that the house was super ridiculously moldy. I mean, it was like you walk in and you just get caked with mold as soon as, I mean, it's undeniable. But if you were to like actually live in the house for about 2 days, then even though you can still obviously smell the mold that's there, if you like slept in it all night, then you kind of forget that it's there if you're to be indoors all day. But nonetheless, it was still like really apparent. You could just see it on the walls, like black mold. And I tried to bleach it out and whatnot, and it would just come back. It was really bad. So not too long after I moved in there, I basically was super depressed from the previous relationship, and I had to try and like find myself. So I saved up enough money that I could just basically close the doors on everything for about 2.5 months. And so I just like baked in this moldy home, like not leaving very often at all. And yeah. So after that 2 or 3 month period, I was still at that house for another 6 months or so. And I would do this traveling work, this marketing and promotional work. And in order to save money, I would sleep in my car. So as stressful as that is, staying in my car, and I was still I was living on like mostly, I was eating out, not fast food as much, but I was still eating out, and not getting great sleep in my car either. But fortunately, for several of those months, it was probably about 15 days out of the month I would be in my car, and then 15 days out of the month I would be in the house, give or take. After I was there for about 10 months, it just got to the point where my bills were stacking up, number one, and number two, I just felt miserable, and I realized that the mold was killing me. I mean, I woke up one day and like I had like a black tumor almost looking thing like on my chest here, and yeah, I was smoking blunts with like tobacco wraps that they just got to a point where I couldn't even smoke them anymore. It was just killing me. So yeah, while I was there in the house, my diet was mostly like canned beans. I was like way under eating. I would have some veggies. Yeah, there was a couple of blackout drinking experiences. One of the times that I drank, it was just like it was beyond all of that. It was way too much. I thought for sure that I had given myself alcohol poisoning, and yeah, just a bad experience. So after I basically torched myself for that 10-month period in that house, I moved back in with family, which meant that the work actually picked up at the time, so I got some extra money, and then I started doing all these health experiments. And this is whenever I really shifted into the first like dietary regimen, which was paleo. I found paleo first, and paleo people are all about like ancestral eating and bone broth, very heavy on the meats, and they're okay with like ancient grains. If I remember correctly, they're not fond of bread, but like there's like pseudo grains that they're okay with. Nonetheless, it was basically like a lot of animal products, and there's a pretty big benefit that I had from that initially, because I mean my diet was like completely devoid of nutrients. Mind you, I'm like 23 or 24 years old at this point, and so if I like add in any kind of structured, healthy, well-sourced vegetables and animal products, then I was going to see benefit no matter what, and that's what happened. Yeah, not long after that, I tried the first coffee enema. I had heard about coffee enemas for like a year up until that point. I never did them, and then I finally did one, and not too long after that, I became accustomed to using that. Occasionally, I mean, it had a marked effect on moving the bowels, and I thought that it was beneficial because of that. So after the paleo thing, I went into full-blown keto, where it was like 85-90% of my calories were from fat. And I did the traditional keto approach, which is like heavy amounts of like fatty red meat, like just eating like sticks of butter, basically. Mind you, I was like avoiding fruit. I never had an appreciable amount of fruit in my life at all up until this point, even beyond this. I was just like avoiding fruit like the plague. Yeah, fructose was demonized. You know, there's this big threat in the keto community about how like fructose causes now non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and you're going to die immediately if you combine it with saturated fat, especially. It's ridiculousness. But yeah, from there I started doing the bulletproof coffee and intermittent fasting. Turns out that if you send yourself into an adrenaline state with no carbohydrates for your liver to work with, whenever you increase the rate of production of your liver, then that causes an appetite suspension. So I would have this like 400 or 500 calorie like fatty coffee for breakfast, and that would easily carry me over into noon. And then eventually from that, I became accustomed to intermittent fasting. But it wasn't without like severe blood sugar dropping, hypoglycemic responses, and becoming accustomed to suffering, basically. Yeah. Then I was super depressed at this time, and so I was drinking like 8-9 cups of coffee a day, and I was also smoking like 1 to 2 grams of weed every day. So yeah, I continued the keto dieting, and it just got like less and less starch, and then I would only eat like fibrous vegetables. And then around that time, I decided to do an intense vegetable experiment where I basically it was mostly sulfurous / cruciferous and leafy vegetables, and then like some bell peppers and whatnot. And I was essentially trying to eat like 12 to 14 cups of vegetables every day, in addition to like a probiotic, oil of oregano, lemon juice, apple cider vinegar. I did all this stuff, and that actually was super beneficial. It erased my lifelong cat allergies. I used to be like super ridiculously sensitive to cats, and it just zapped it within 2 weeks. Eventually, I came back to the keto dieting, just still using a lot of vegetables, heavy on the vegetables, namely fibrous vegetables. And then I came across somebody who put up a liver cleanse. It was convincing. You know, he said, "Look, here's my AST and ALT scores." And I brought them down after a week of doing this. My testosterone went up, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, okay, you know, I'll try it as well. And it involved like 3 coffee enemas, a period of intermittent fasting every day, a bunch of mung beans, and certain vegetables, spices, whatever. And I saw a benefit from that, but then things got worse after that. Then I decided, as my health was getting worse, and I was becoming more sensitive to things, I decided that the answer was to fast more, was to give because the only thing that really gave me any kind of relief was whenever I didn't digest anything whatsoever. And the idea is that your gut will repair itself in a supreme way whenever there's nothing that's coming in. I don't necessarily agree with that logic now, but it's the best that I had at the time. And yeah, with this prolonged fasting, still having no fruit in my diet, it got to this point where I was like running on adrenaline all the time. I would have like a tablespoon of coffee, and it would just destroy me. Like I would be like freezing in the morning. This was for a while. It was like my favorite thing was to like go to a coffee shop on an empty stomach, have coffee, urinate like 2 quarts of water, just straight water, and then be in this like hyper adrenaline state, and then go for long distance runs of like 3 or 4 miles. It's a long distance, but you know, just like a steady state cardio, which just intensifies the whole thing. It just adds on to it. It's like really not doing me any favors because I couldn't recover from traditional weight training. Around this time, I did a sauna experiment by somebody, a protocol that was intended to like get rid of like heavy metals and pesticides. Super ridiculously intense. The eating window was extremely hard. The foods were super strict. It took me a couple of tries just to get through it. And yeah, man, it was like a heavy amount of protein for like 7 days, and then there, for the last 3 days, it was like basically no protein, just a little bit of vegetables, and it was just garbage, man. And it was like hard exercise that went into a sauna protocol, and I basically blew my adrenals out doing that. And I think I overloaded my kidneys at the same time, looking back on it. Then I believe it was right after this that somebody gave me mushrooms. They gave me like 3 Ziploc bags worth of mushrooms, which turned into, I mean, they gave me more than that actually, but I ended up doing about 3 Ziploc bags worth, which I'm estimating is like 9 grams of psychedelic mushrooms. For anybody who has done them before, they understand that that's a lot. I was rolling around on the floor. I had like no bodily control for several hours, and I was just fasting and doing mushrooms for that particular day. It got to the point I had to stop because my hands and feet had like swollen up to like 33% bigger than they are, and they were pooling with blood. I think I might have like initiated a fungal infection if I didn't already have one before that. Then I started on the carnivore diet, which was it's the standard carnivore diet, which is just basically like straight meat, some butter. It's all animal products, right? That's the name of it. Then I transitioned. I'm like, okay, well, I'll take this to the next level, and I found somebody who is a big proponent of raw carnivore, which is like raw meat and raw egg yolks and raw oysters and raw fish eggs, and the whole thing. And then I jumped into that. I got like fish eggs from Russia, and the fish eggs, they ended up going bad in the fridge, and I ended up doing this thing where I ate like raw liver into raw oysters into raw fish eggs, and then I like threw my brains out, threw up everything that was in me, and I had to go through this miserable experience twice in order to figure out that the fish eggs were bad. You can't tell because they basically smell the same. Yeah, and then during that time I was working in Texas for like a week at one point, and I was living in my car, and I was just buying like ground beef at a Whole Foods, and then I would eat that, and if like 2 days went by and it was still in the car, then I would just have that again. And I had egg yolks that were like 6 days old that were just raw. And yeah, oddly enough, during that trip I did get sick whenever I had Jimmy John's, and interestingly enough, I was really sick for like 2 days, and then I got over it. But then I had like a nagging sickness feeling of lethargy and sore throat and whatnot. And it wasn't until I added vegetables back in for like 2 days. I ate vegetables for the first time in like 2 or 3 months, and my sickness, whatever that lingering sickness was, it went away. I was sick for like 2 weeks up until that point. Um, I had been playing with enemas in and out here. Like, if I got myself into a lot of trouble, I found that if I ate a lot of activated charcoal all at once, then it would soak stuff up. Or if I did an enema and moved everything outward and downward, then uh, that would help. So, yeah, there was some time back around the time that I did the mushrooms, actually. I did this just retarded enema experiment where I put in, it was probably 30 or 40 different types of herbs. I like simmered parsley, and I also threw in like coconut oil and lemon juice. I like basically did everything except for minerals. Like, I didn't add any minerals, and I didn't add any kind of like food source or sugars or anything. It was just like purely to try and like kill bacteria or virus or parasites, because I was like totally convinced that whatever was wrong with me was like just inside of my rectum, and if I could just like blow that up. So I did this ridiculous enema. It left like a bruising from the interior, like it like burned my intestines, and yeah, I don't know. I thought I killed myself actually at one point. I think I slept for like 18 hours after that. It was just a miserable experience. Followed it with a foot bath of like seaweed and iodine or something. Yeah. Um, yeah, so the enema experiments continued, and it basically like I stopped kind of seeing relief with those. It could like sequester symptoms for a little bit, but then it's like it got to the point where if I ate anything, I mean literally like the whole grocery store was just a giant booby trap. There's no way to put it, like I couldn't eat anything canned. If I remember one time whenever I was doing the raw carnivore thing, I like had like a handful of watermelon, and it just like destroyed me. I tried milk periodically every 2 or 3 months during this whole period, and that would always be the worst response. It would make me like itch like a monkey and look terrible. Give me like brain fog, and yeah, I'm just like running on adrenaline all the time. At one point, I ate like 2 or 3 tablespoons of clay, like bentonite and illite clay. I tried both of them, just straight up eating dirt, and yeah, it turns out it doesn't work. Also tried that as an enema. That doesn't work either. Don't mess with that. At a certain point, I was just like, screw everything. I'm just gonna I'm gonna try eating pizza for on a 1 day fast. And so I, for 24 hours, would go by, and then at like 8 p.m. I would get a large pizza that was like 22 or 2300 calories. I would eat that. I did that for like 5 days, and then of course, it just gave me like this crazy insulin response, and I felt miserable, and yeah. So that was probably the darkest point, was leading up to the 24-hour pizza diet. But I mean, up until that point, it was like I was just eating like a lot of cheese that seemed to be okay, but I mean, I was so hypersensitive to everything. I couldn't even touch starch. It was really bad. And then it starts to turn around whenever I finally started listening to Robert Morse, who I thought was a crackpot before, but I just started doing the raw vegan diet, and yeah, then it turns around from there. It turns into the castor oil and turpentine. I restored my adrenal glands. Then I learned to use milk and raw starch, and yeah.